Go. Okay. So I'm going to give a little introduction first. That cat's crazy. The purpose of why we are doing these movie night evaluations is it's an opportunity to train our perception and our attention. In the Toltec work, our goal is to upgrade our consciousness. And so this is a way for us to analyze the world around us with layers and layers of detail and attention and perception that the ordinary world people don't. So that's a real quick background. When we watch the movie, that's what we're looking for. So with that as a mind, what are your first thoughts about Groundhog Day?
It's a non-ordinary movie. We're shown a non-linear timeline.
Okay, non-linear time. Yeah. Anything else before I start asking questions?
I have a bunch of notes. So
Nobody talk at once here, okay? Okay, I'm going to just ask a question then. Why Groundhog Day?
My guess would be that it's a non-determined day. It's a day where they decide what the next 6 weeks is going to be like. But so that day is determining kind of the future.
Okay, that's good. It's a branch point. But why Groundhog Day? Why couldn't they also have done Thanksgiving or the 4th of July as a nostalgic type holiday?
Because it's signaling spring, which would be growth, rebirth. I have
Good.
That has something
Yeah.
to do with it.
What else is going on about the same time in the calendar? There's some history here. Why Groundhog Day? Why are they using the groundhog for prognostication?
So you're asking more about why do we use groundhog? Why is there a Groundhog Day in general?
Yeah, that's the key to this movie.
Well, I was curious about that too, about the shadow and stuff, because it's not really near a solstice or anything. I mean, it's a month after. And
You're close. What is it near?
What's that?
What is it near?
She said it.
Imvolk? Yeah. Imvolk, can you define it?
Ooh.
It's one of the 8 Sabbats of the year, Wheel of the Year.
Yeah.
Takes place on February 2nd, and it's generally held to honor the bride.
Okay, it's Brigid's Day.
Brigid's
Day. It's close. It should be.
Brigid the bride. Yes.
Yeah. It's Brigid was one of the pantheon of the Celts, right? She is the feminine, the triple goddess, the maiden mother in Crone. So she embodies all 3 aspects of the divine feminine. And her day really shouldn't be the 2nd, should it? It should be the 6th. But it's part of that calendric shift when the Roman Catholic Church modified calendars to make it a little easier to co-opt pagan religions, because if you move it from the astronomically defined point of energy, then there's less energy there. So
the quarter holidays fall exactly halfway between equinox and solstice, which is generally about the 5th or the 6th.
Okay, please don't.
No.
No, kitty.
Something you can't do.
Yeah.
But
that's how it
it's
reminds
a
me
new
of
surface.
Like, I'm gonna actually. There's something wrong with the angle. And,
Right.
Yeah, she's gonna fix it.
I know. They're
So
wires.
the groundhog question is: does anyone know which European tradition I'm not going to go so far as to say worship, but the use of the groundhog comes from?
I don't really know, but based off of the movie, I would say it's German.
Bingo. That is key, right?
Yeah.
The polkas.
Polka, yeah.
There's a large German population in that part of Pennsylvania, and it is the German tradition, so that was a good deduction. And did they always use a groundhog? No.
Apparently, we haven't done
They
a
go-
groundhog
Research.
They go. They don't know what a groundhog is in Germany. originally they used the bear.
Oh my god.
Much more known to be a hibernator and then come out in the spring, right? And then they did a really good job of wiping out the bears, and so they had to switch, and they used the badger. And it was the badger that came out, and then the Germans came to the U.S. and badgers were apparently harder to find, and groundhogs run slower, so then they started using the groundhog. So it's that transition or prognostication, and it's really, being on Briga's Day, it's an acknowledgement that divine feminine or Mother Nature is going to know what is going to happen soon. So it's that 6 weeks, do we have winter or not? And what's interesting about this is if it's wintry and cloudy and he doesn't see the shadow, I'm sorry, I mixed that up. If it's wintry and cold, there's no shadow, and that means spring is coming. But if it's sunny and he does see the shadow, he sees the shadow, and then the bad things happen. More winter, more darkness. So it's like you're tapping in to the shadow self of the animal you're using for prognostication, which used to be the bear, then was the badger, and now it's the groundhog. So, and it's all about invoke. So that sets the tone for what's going on Groundhog Day. It's the acknowledgement of the divine feminine. And then what? What happens? Does he want to be there at the start of the moon?
He despises it.
He despises it. It's his 4th year in a row. And he's all depressed. I'm going up there again.
And he's on a very big ego kick because of his prima donna.
So where is he on the tree of life?
Well, he's still very Malkuthian. He's still based in ego and with, the lower realms.
We use the tree of life a lot. The Kabbalistic tree of life and the 10 Sephiroth and the pathways is a roadmap to human consciousness. It's a roadmap to the divine structure of the universe. It can be used for quantum physics. It can be used for everything, really. It's the structure of the universe. Over the centuries, it's what people have put together as our best understanding of the structure of the universe, is the Kabbalistic tree of life. And if we want to understand ourselves and our own consciousness, the Kabbalistic tree of life is the roadmap for upgrading our consciousness. That's why we use it. So the bottom sphere in the physical world is called Malkuth. So when we say Malkuthian, that means we're tied in with the physical world and we're really not paying attention to yet the higher spiritual realms of life that are possible. So who at the beginning of the movie is playing the role of the fool? That pure innocence, just going through life, trusting that the right thing will happen.
The girl? Annie McDowell?
Exactly. She's the fool. She's in there and she tells us right in that first conversation she has with the Bill Murray character that, I'm just drifting through life and something good will happen, right? Not so many words, or her exact words, but that's what she's doing. She starts out in French poetry and ends up a producer on a TV station because she's just blindly following and the next stepping stone appears. So he goes through, he does a mediocre job on his first attempt at reporting on the thing, and he's trying so hard to get away from Punxsutawney and back to his safe Malkuthian world. So this trip to Punxsutawney, it's this start of him leaving that Malkuthian world, right? He's leaving. And he's not comfortable with that. He's not happy with that. He's trying to get back, and then what happens?
He's stuck.
The blizzard. He's stuck there.
Well, it's also, I think it's interesting that everything that does happen to him it goes against his certainties. Like they show several times where he's certain of things, and then all the things that he's certain of
Gone.
come back and cinch in on him.
Right, gone. Absolutely gone.
I think, on one level you could make the case, well, is he just dreaming this whole thing? Has the whole thing just been a dream? In which case it puts him kind of in Yesod, which is, the first suffereth up the tree,
right.
Straight up. So because that's associated with the dreaming, and so it's almost like he's stuck in Yesod, just going over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Like when we have the same dream over all night long, or we keep, having
day
that
same
scenario. Maybe something happens a little different, but if you've had repeating dreams, it felt a lot like that.
So that's good. He's left the comfort of his city. He's left Malkuth. He's in Yesod. Yesod is the first step up. It covers the astral. It covers the dreaming. And of course, from the Toltec point of view, this is a dream. That's a dream. It's all a dream. And our job is to learn how to master the control of the dreams. So that's kind of the theme. He's trying to master this dream, whether it's a sleeping dream where he relives this over and over and over again, or not, or whether it's just a metaphor for the real dream and he really is stuck in there. What else is this a metaphor for? Sarah knows this one. She just needs to say it.
No pressure.
No pressure.
It's your turn, Sarah.
The shaman's picking on it because you're too quiet. So what is the whole theme of the mood? What else is it a metaphor of?
Not sure what the answer you're looking for, but the thing that kept coming to my mind while I was watching it was those people that had figured out how to download talents and knowledge from past lives. That's
Almost.
what it made me think of.
It's reincarnation.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
This whole thing is a metaphor for reincarnation. He's living one life over and over and over until he gets, or one day rather, over and over until he gets it right. So this is an example of one of the theories of reincarnation, is that we literally live the same life over and over and over until we get it right. It's not just, okay, I was, born in the 1840s and I was a soldier in the Civil War and I got shot at the Gettysburg Battle and I died, and so then I'm born in the 1890s and I go off to fight World War I and I get shot in battle, and then I reborn and I go off to World War II and get shot in battle, and keep doing that over and over. It's like, maybe I shouldn't be going to war, and at some point one of those lives sinks in and you realize maybe killing our fellow humans isn't what we're here for. That's one theory. The other theory is, I'm born in 1840 and I go off to fight the Civil War and I get killed in battle. And then I'm born back again in 1840 and I go off to fight the Civil War and I'm killed in battle over and over. Just like the Groundhog Day, only it's a whole life, not one day. So that's one of the metaphors for. And he kind of figures it out after about the third or fourth day. And you see him starting to use those memories and the glimpses of, oh, I can use what I learned yesterday today, right? So now that means I can learn what I used in my last lifetime now, whether it was this lifetime being lived again, or whether it was a different lifetime in the 17th century, or you were an 18th century French poet, or whatever it is, right? You tap into that and you learn. So what other...
Well, kind of going along the idea of the lifetimes is some of this stuff that we learned from EJ about working the Bardos, and the fact that, it's there all the time. The background field of the universe is always there, and when we learn to navigate spiritually, and when we're caught in the dreaming, we're navigating these spaces. And the way he describes it is, really, you're always in the same room, and it's always the same day. It's just that we're having these different experiences, and so there are overlays on top of that. So in this way, it really speaks to that always the same place, always the same day. But he also describes the macro dimensions as being either corridors or rooms. So you're either moving from one space to the next, or you're in this space. And one thing that is common in a space is that you have a gatekeeper. So the first gatekeeper that I noticed was the old drunk man. He's there every day. He's like one of the first things he runs into when he goes outside. And if you notice, things don't change until the end when he actually gives the guy money. And so that's a common thing where you have to light a cigarette for somebody or give somebody some money or whatever. There's usually some kind of an exchange with the gatekeeper. And so I didn't remember. I was just guessing that at the end he would actually give him money, where all the other times he always ignored the guy. So that was one thing I noticed.
So that was one of the many gatekeepers in this film. The first one he runs into as soon as he exits his bedroom.
Yeah,
the guy at the top of the stairs, who first day he's kind of like barely cordial, and then he's like shoving the guy away, dodging him, and yet when he finally starts to decide, okay, I'm gonna really want to live this day, he has that conversation with the Annie McDowell character, Rita. It's, what would you do if you only had one day to live? Right, remember that scene? That's the key. From that point on, he's trying, but he doesn't always succeed, right? But the one scene with the guy at the top of the stairs, he comes out and it's like, he says something about, what was it, the weather or the groundhog, and he just goes into poetry about winter coming spring and pats a guy and walks off, and the guy's just happy now. It's like, I had this interaction and I feel good about it. So he starts making other people feel good. It's not anymore about himself feeling good. And so that's one of the many keys to navigating this lifetime, is it becomes about service, helping others, whether it's the gatekeeper who needed the money because the old guy was old, sick, and gonna die, and let's help him go out and feel good about himself, or whether it's the little bratty kid falling out of the tree that he's never thanked him for saving his life. It's like, oh, you didn't thank me again, you little brat. Have a nice day. And it's the ladies in the car. And what's interesting is, he's been there 3 other days, right? And then he starts doing the same day over and over and over again. And he knows he's maintaining the memories. But most of the people he's interacting with were the locals there. You see their reaction to him changing, right? As far as they're concerned, it's the first time.
Oh, it's when he starts to act nice towards people, he's still kind of doing it from a selfish place, and it actually leads to further despondency, and that's what leads to a suicidal track. He's nice to people before that happens. It isn't until he's starting to bring people together.
Right. He was being nice, but he was really just trying to get sex.
Yeah.
Right. He wanted the Nancy, and the implication was you saw him with other girls, but then Nancy comes along and is like, oh, she's a little jealous. She's never seen him before, so why should she be jealous? She's got that thread, that connection.
There was a couple of times when somebody said, oh, this, did you ever have deja vu before? Or this feels familiar, or, what is it? So that he's wakening other people up in his process.
Yes, that's exactly where I was going with that, is he's having an effect on others to wake them up. What was your comment?
Before he starts trying to be nice, I was very struck by the way it illustrated that he's caught on that he can learn about the people and his surroundings, and then he tries to use the information that he gleans to get what he wants from others.
It starts
like
out
with the girl, the blonde.
Girl, and
he learns all about her, and then the next day, I'm him. I'm Mr. Right.
I think that really, all those different attempts, I think show what we go through as we start to wake up and realize we have abilities. So like some of the things that I wrote was that, he started to, sorry, I lost my train of thought. I went to my notes and they weren't clear. that we see him doing it for these more devious purposes and getting mixed results, but you see that God complex where you think, oh, well, I'm invincible, I can do anything, and yet you're still not getting the results that you want, you know. So you can see somebody messing around with magic earlier in their life, and they're like, oh, well, I'm cool, I know these things, I can do these things, but they're not really getting the results that they want. And one thing I noticed is that we do see the guy later on, but the obnoxious friend that shows up always shows up right after he walks past the poor guy and doesn't pay him. The day that he paid the poor guy, the obnoxious friend didn't show up. And then also the day that he remembered not to step in the ice water puddle, he didn't step in it, but somebody comes right along and does it also. So it's almost like a karmic exchange. He created like almost a void because he didn't fall into that trap, but then somebody else came along and did that too. And so we see that a lot of times in life too.
Yeah, the trap is still there.
The trap is still there, we just didn't spring it.
Ken, what do you...
Well, piggybacking on that too, at that same part where he says I'm a god, and he starts acting genuinely and honestly, he starts getting offered hugs and stuff, like Andy McDowell starts to be affectionate towards him, but he's still not bridging any consciousness with people, and he does say, I don't deserve it, I'm not the kind of person who deserves this. And so even though he does start to attract people to him the way he doesn't believe in himself, he's still not making the actual connection.
And isn't that sort of like the response that many people have when they somehow find themselves on this path, where they start to go, but this is like being a god. I am like a god.
Yeah. And they also, we have to develop...
But then they can't quite accept their own godlike nature, their own divinity.
And so I wrote regarding that it's kind of like you have to fake it till you make it. There's all of us have to go through that period where we accept our own divinity and we accept our abilities, and we don't have to make excuses for them. But until that point, you're still kind of like faking it until you make it.
I thought it was kind of crazy with the scene where he has to be, he's obviously going back every day to change one thing he said to Rita, and how like it just made me think of like, you know, at one point he's like kind of deceptive, like I'm going to change something that is about me to match you, but at the same time you see how easy he gets shut down with one of the things. He's like, oh no,
and how many times he got slapped. It's like she had the integrity that his BS couldn't cut through to. And so he had to develop his own ethics, you know. I think that's the thing about our invincibility, that we think, oh, we got these special powers, we can do all these great and wonderful things, but how easy it is, like let's say a friend is rude to you, it's like, well, I'm going to hex you then, you know. It's so easy to go there to that negative misuse of power. And, you know, so he gets hit with that over and over again until he starts to develop his own sense of ethics on his ability to predict the future. Really.
Yeah, he doesn't seem to have any power of his own at that point. He's all questions. He's just diverting other people's energy. He actually isn't really exerting any energy on people. He keeps walking the real energy through channels. He keeps channeling people into.
I think it's important too that he's in that spot where he's just genuinely confused.
Yeah, when
he truly does not know.
Yeah, when he says I'm not going to live by the rules, and he starts breaking the law and stuff, and he wears the cowboy costume, he starts costuming and getting laid. The next shift is that's all he does when he's trying to live like normal people, is he keeps asking people questions, which that all culminates to him getting slapped a million times, spoiling it. And she asks him, is this what love is for you? That's the big question she asks him, and that's kind of when that section's over.
So you're following, interestingly enough, his path up the tree of life, right? He starts out in Malkuth, then he's into that dreaming state. He thinks, oh, I'm going to have an effect on this, and it doesn't work. So then he has to add his mental abilities and start analyzing what's going on around him. He's stepped up into Hod. And then he has to start using beyond that, you know, his intuition, right? And that's over in Nitzak. And then lastly, he's trying to get to Tifereth, the heart center. That Christ consciousness, Tifereth, the heart center for love. And that's where he ends up. And that's, he got her back to the room once, and the implication was they'd had sex, and he woke up alone the next day. So the next time he gets her back to the room, he didn't have sex. The alarm clock goes off at 6 a.m., and it's a different song. And she reaches over him and clunks. Right? And he's broken the cycle because it wasn't about him. It was a life of service, that day of service.
He had to care about something more than himself, and he was caring about others. One thing I noticed, and I don't even remember what triggered this comment, but it's kind of like he was still powerless without the higher guidance. It wasn't like he could just figure this all out himself. At some point, he had to, truly, be in service.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. Because there's a section where he does start to live a better life. It's almost like a fantasy life. He learns to ice carve. He learns how to play the piano. He's reading all this great literature, and drinking his coffee and having this deep breath and the satisfied smile on his face. And then there's that point where he deals with the homeless man. He starts fighting death. So he starts to be compelled towards goodness, but it's all like directed towards art, self-love. But then all of a sudden it comes to this idea of like death and suffering, and he has that moment where he can't save that man, and then that seems to be the turning point where then he takes that the goodness and brings people together, like stops making it just about himself. Like he was living okay, he was being a better person, but he wasn't helping anyone until after that confrontation with death and suffering.
And I think all of that's true, and I think part of the difference then earlier on is that it's like when we go astral in the dreaming, and it's like, oh, I'm lucid, I can go anywhere I want, so I'm going to start walking through walls and flying over cliffs and all of that stuff, and never really asking yourself, well, why am I here? Why am I being shown this space? It's not just to go fly. My triggers for lucid dreaming were my dad. My dad died when I was 13, so every time I saw my dad in the dreaming, I would realize finally, oh, this must be a dream, because every time I see my dad, it's a dream. So then I'd go fly, and I never stayed and talked to my dad and said, well, why are you here? What message do you have for me? So I think that in that way, he realizes he has a power, and even though he's not using it for bad, personal purposes, he's still kind of without direction. It's just like, oh, I'll take up ice sculpture, or I'll, learn to play the piano, or all these things, but he's really not contributing to his growth and to that of his fellow beings until later.
Yeah, he's in the bar that one day reading his literature, or coffee house or whatever, and he hears that piano music on, and that's when he decides, oh, yeah, she only wants a guy who plays an instrument, right? So he has to go learn the piano. And that's now more into that intuitive side, right? Now he's touching on Nitzak at that point. And then he's doing the ice sculpture, artistic work, right? That's clearly not a hod activity. So that's when he's starting to fill out. And it was right after he got the music and he got the art going on, and he truly was becoming humble, right? He was becoming humble because, he'd made this ice sculpture how many times, right? He's just like, I'm a little bit versatile, And the first 8 or 10 times he'd probably done that, it was like, hey, look at my ice sculpture. But now we see him at the end of the journey through this movie, and he's developed humility, and he's become more balanced, and he's truly caring about others.
Another thing I noticed was the change in his tactics. It wasn't even a tactic anymore. By the time he really comes humble, it's not even that he didn't care about the love interest or getting together with the girl, but he's like, let's try to get together later, but I got to go do this thing. And it's like, how often do we get in a relationship where we drop everything to impress that person, and we become all these things that we think they want us to be, And then they're like, oh, well, now you're just trying to convince me. Whereas he has now a life and he's helping others, and she kind of, not that he's brushing her aside on purpose, but she has a chance then to see what he's really doing and who he's really become. And then she starts to get a little jealous as to, well, she bids the money on him. So at that point, she's turned the tables, on the relationship, but it was partly because he was somebody now. He wasn't just somebody trying to impress her.
Right, he was genuine.
Yeah.
He was showing through, right?
I feel like at some point he had decided to become his real self. And when he's playing the music and that last day where he finally gets out, it was like he kind of let all the stuff go that was superficial, and he was like, I'm going to play music, I'm going to throw the party, I'm going to help people around town. And it felt like from him doing that was kind of that space where she saw, instead of somebody convincing, saw him doing things he really enjoyed from his own virtues.
Yeah, he was using his strengths, his charms, his performance, his the talent. He's obviously he's a weatherman. He's very charismatic, but he starts using all that for better, for making people warm to him, and like you said, be a musician, host the party. Because like a weatherman's kind of like like a lot of people think it's like a joke job.
Right.
You know what I'm saying like that's like the least honorable thing to use.
You're not a meteorologist.
Let's
Dr. Fishbeck.
There was a time when, in order to be the weatherman on TV, you were a meteorologist.
Yeah.
You were trained and you had science and maybe a master's degree in meteorology. And then they started doing things like, well, we need somebody who's cute with large breasts and a skimpy dress on presenting the weather. So they hired models to just read a script, actresses. And then it's like, well, wait a minute. Exactly. And so that was a change throughout media, Corey. That's the movie Broadcast News, if you want to watch that sometime.
Excellent film.
But that's less of a spiritual message. I mean, it's all about the breakdown of society and the breakdown of standards. So in this case, he's really sincere. So past lives, reliving the same day over, the same life over, or different lives over. What were you going to say?
Oh, I was going to say, there's a lot of metaphors at the beginning of what kind of life he's actually living. The opening shot of him, he's in front of the blue screen, so he's kind of in this unreality.
Right.
And then everybody that's talking to him, he keeps diverting everything towards this job that he wants to get in some bigger market. So like even the people that are trying to talk to him, he can't even talk about what's happening in the here and now. He keeps diverting everything to some unrealized future.
Right. He's looking too far down the road. He's not looking at what's right in front of him. But we have this now. It's a model. Reincarnation. It's being sincere, living a life of service. How does that affect us now? Those concepts. What's the take-home message?
Well, one thing about the past lives and this movie in particular is the idea of nailing yourself to the cross. When you can have past lives and they could be all completely different, but at one point in a lifetime you woke up and realized what was going on and decided to make the best out of that lifetime. And then what I've noticed since then is that, okay, well, maybe one lifetime took place in ancient Scotland, one took place in the Old West, one is, current, but the same players keep showing up. The same husband, the same kids, the same ex, the same whatever. And there's clearly lessons that have to be learned. And so you do, in fact, when you really start tapping into these lifetimes, see that it is like Groundhog Day, because at some point we woke up, we said, okay, we're going to just keep doing this one lifetime until we get it right. And so, fortunately, according to E.J. Gold and Coyote, is that when you come into that new lifetime, you pick up where you left off. You don't have to go back and relearn everything up until that point again. So let's say you died in your late 40s or something in one lifetime, and you had, found an esoteric school and you started taking the teachings and started learning, and then you die, but weren't able to do anything with that in that lifetime. When you come into this lifetime, you kind of pick up at some point the knowledge that you had, and that's where I think a lot of this deja vu stuff comes from. It's like, okay, the scenery may be a little different, but it's the same actors doing the same play.
I've always seen those deja vu moments as kind of like touchstones. It's like, yep, I'm still on the right track.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the key to
Where
the
I need to
deja
be.
vu experiences, there's two. One from the world of physics and one from the world of mythology and archetypes. One is anything that fits an archetype is going to seem familiar.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you see somebody on the path of the fool, and that resonates. You see somebody else on the path of nature, the path of the moon from Malkuth up to Nitzak directly, and all of that will resonate, especially for women. That's the start of the feminine path. The other, of course, is in the world of physics. Once you get above the third dimension, there is no linear time. It's circular. It's all happening at once. And where we happen to be is where we've programmed our assemblage point to be and to look. And so when we start doing this work, when you start doing true spiritual work, trying to climb the tree of life, you are going to have more and more of those experiences. At first, they may be through the dreaming, and then they'll be through the waking visions, and then you'll be able to consciously induce them through meditation techniques, is to look at the other lives, to look at previous lives in your soul lineage, the lineage of your essence. Look at parallel lives. And so I guess you could call that a third category of deja vu, is when we start looking at what is going on in this life in a parallel track. Are we in a room, or in that other parallel track, did Kent paint this room a really garish color instead of this beautiful hardwood library den he's got going here? So, and then of course there's higher planes when you're doing this work that you will start tapping into through visions, through this same conversation that's taking place on the higher planes. So there is a lot of metaphysical, spiritual, and physics-based reasons why we have those deja vu experiences. So take home, if some of all of that is the take-home message of the movie Groundhog Day, what are we supposed to do with that information now?
I actually wrote a note at the end of the movie, if sort of the parable to walk away from it with. If you find yourself stuck in the back of beyond, use the time to become a better person.
There you go.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, it's use this lesson to serve others, to better yourself. We exist for more. This is something on my website. We exist for more than to just drag ourselves home through rush hour traffic, to watch sitcoms, drink beer, argue with our kids, and then go off tomorrow to do the same thing all over again. So if you're caught in that kind of a rut, repeating the same day all over, and there was that scene. He's at the bar, he's drinking with the two guys just before he takes over and starts driving, because everybody's too drunk to drive, where have you ever found yourself in the same place, having the same day over and over and over again, and there's no way out, and the guy's sitting there, he's obviously a miner or a mill worker or some blue-collar worker, and he's sitting there, yeah, that's my life.
Yeah, there's that message too, that,
right.
This isn't even something about, past lives or reincarnation, but especially, kind of a dark scene, but it's like when you're living the same thing again and again, and all of a sudden he's looking for these escapes of how to kill himself to end it, and it's like, that's a bigger message than reincarnation, about people
right.
being stuck in that blue pill
Or
world.
like a teenager who's going through bullying or something. It's the same thing over and over
Every
day,
day,
to the point where they don't think they have any other escape, so they commit suicide or something. But one of the things that I noticed was some of the steps was that first he started by just observing the details, kind of like, So we all get in this loop where it's like, okay, why do I always, end up like with a crappy boyfriend, or some repeating thing that no matter what, like usually somebody who's in an abusive relationship will find themselves over and over and over again in abusive relationships. So at one point you got to wake up. So that's the first step, is waking up. And then observing, okay, what is it that's the same about all these situations that, I keep doing over and over again. And then the testing, just like, okay, well, try making one little change. And then how does that work out, And obviously, like, maybe with a coworker at work, where it's just like every time you get in the room with this coworker, there's this bad energy or something that's kind of like, okay, I don't have any control over the coworker, but I do have control over my reality, how I take things, and maybe I can try just smiling today. See what that does, And then you test that, and you journal it, and you go back and you keep looking at that, so that eventually, you can see what works. And so that's really a lot of what our magical experimentation is about.
There's a key that you mentioned there about waking up. Mm-hmm. That was portrayed every day in this film, right? The alarm clock clicked. I love those old-fashioned flip-down numbers. That definitely dates me.
The first digital clock we had it when I was a kid.
Yeah.
My dad brought one.
I had one exactly like that. Yeah. It may even have been the same model.
Like they just went around.
But I think mine was wood grain. It wasn't the white, and this one was white.
So was it.
The wood grain. So he wakes up, and it's like his second Groundhog Day there. He wakes up, and it's clicks, and already, even when he's not trying to observe, he instantly notices that it's the same song. Mm-hmm. And then the radio announcer's making the same bad jokes. Small town radio, right? Bad jokes. And just like studying with a shaman. Bad jokes. But you have to laugh at them, right? It's part of the rules. I tell a bad joke, you guys gotta laugh. And then he goes out and looks out at the window, and he's like, what is going on? And he's like, everybody he encounters, what day is it? Well, oh, it's Groundhog Day. It's Groundhog Day. It's like, again? And everybody laughs. They think he's
crazy
or crazy or whatever. But it's that waking up, that little subtle waking up. And there's actually a state that we can access right at that boundary between being asleep and being awake, where once the conscious mind program starts to run, there's too many layers. It's like our RAM gets overloaded, and we can't see beyond that. So between the dreaming, when we're asleep, and between waking, there is a state of conscience where it's easier to access those higher planes. And we have to learn to work with that. Right? It takes practice. So like every day when you wake up, there's that little verge where we're kind of remembering the dreams, but not quite. But we're not awake. And there's a little point where you can be there, where you just start to wake up and you don't remember who you are,
or where you are,
why you are, what are you doing here. There's none of that program has loaded yet. And what you're doing on the Tree of Life is at that moment you're in the sphere of Tiferet, the heart center, the Christ center. And you're tapping in to that direct path through Kether to the beyond the veil. You're looking and tapping into that clear light of objective reality. That's what you're in. That state when you're starting to wake up. Nothing is happening, nothing ever has happened, nothing ever will happen. When you're in that state. That's a line from the American Book of the Dead.
To your eternal consciousness.
Yeah, that eternal consciousness. And that state, of course, is part of the objective, to capture that and be able to go there at will and to maintain that level of connection with the highest. without letting the world around us interfere. So that's why we watched this movie. It's our first attempt at these. This movie contains a lot of what I would call low-hanging fruit, easy pickings for a conversation about these spiritual subjects. And you could use this movie. You'll probably want to go home and rewatch it, and I encourage that. Is go watch it again from some of these notes. And we're going to have the tape up online here, and I'm not sure how long that'll take us, a couple of 3 days. And you could use this alone as a guidebook, a roadmap for spiritual awakening, spiritual consciousness. That's why we picked this movie. Any other comments? We could sit here and analyze some minutiae. Yeah, right. Go ahead.
Couple of things. One, I thought it was great that the name of the newspaper in Punxsutawney was The Spirit.
Yeah. Some Easter eggs they call it.
It's called what?
The Spirit.
I never noticed that.
And they also, at the end of the party is called the Inner Circle.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
That's
I missed that.
That's right.
That's good.
I saw that.
And it's like all the people from the day come up to him, and it's like, this,
Yeah, that was what I missed the part about the inner circle. That's good that you got that.
And the one comment I was gonna mention was the idea of like you're walking into the blue pill world, and you want to talk to people about the stuff that you're going through. Yeah. Your red pill world, and it's like, how many times have I felt that way where I'm like, you're just talking to people that like.
They have no clue.
They have no clue, and they're just like, "You're crazy. I took 12 years of Catholic school. You're not a god." Like, stuff like that.
I love that line.
That's a great line.
I went to 12 years of Catholic school, therefore I'm a spiritual expert. Can't wait.
I thought it was interesting too that Harold Ramis, the director, was the actor who played the doctor.
Oh yeah, that's right.
He cameoed.
So there's nothing wrong with you. You're not unhealthy. There's nothing physically wrong. I think you need to see a psychiatrist or whatever. This is a mental thing.
They found a Weasley guy to play the psychiatrist.
She unbelievable.
Well, I may have had a class on that one. Yeah.
I think maybe we should meet again.
Yeah. I love it when like the directors have a little cameo, and then of course those two were in Ghostbusters together, and.
No, there's actually a lot more in there that I remembered, and I'm pretty sure I've watched it with Coyote as a movie night. That was probably the last time I saw it, but it's interesting. Not all movies are a work movie. I think mostly because most movies today are action-packed adventures. It's more about the lights and the sounds and the action than it is about a plot line. But in this particular case, the director and the writers were putting together something that was supposed to be thought-provoking.
It's a thought-provoking comedic chick flick. So I mean,
that's the genre for me. Remember that one?
Yeah, but there's still some excellent films being made.
Yeah.
But like we've watched, the obvious one, of course, is The Matrix. That's a really good one to watch as a work movie.
We'll probably watch that one next.
We've even watched Rocky Horror Picture Show, which, is a really lousy D-rate movie, but what makes it fun is going and dressing up and being part of it. And to sit back and analyze it, it's just amazing how much really good material is in there.
We need a few more.
Yeah, before we're ready for Rocky Horror.
That's more advanced. But I think we'll go with The Matrix the next time we get together. We'll have to pick a date and see if we can figure a time.
And then it's like, you can sit home and watch it by yourself, but what makes it interesting is to talk about it as a group like this and to bring out different points that you didn't really think about. Because even if they weren't there, even if the director never intended it and we're reading something into it, we're reading stuff into it that's worth talking about and looking at it as an illustration for our work.
A lot of these directors don't necessarily know, right? The writer didn't know, whatever, but they are tapped into, whether they know it or not, the archetypes. They have the tree of life running in them. And so for that reason, you will see a lot of things showing up that, they probably didn't intend.
I know you said that Coyote was having, regular group meetings going through the return of Twin Peaks. And I don't think that show probably could be understood without a community completely.
Oh.
I mean, like, if the internet's proving anything, it's that, like, the massive experiences being collected is part of the experience. So it's like
That's part of the Toltec formula. That's what we're here for.
And really that's been happening throughout time, which is how all these myths and legends have come down to us. They're part of our collective consciousness now. And, they've been repeated over and over again. Like, okay, Matrix was a good movie. It was thought-provoking. It's interesting. And now it's going to just go its way. Unless we talk about it as a work movie and say, oh, well, the key to the Matrix is the idea that you're offered a choice to wake up, and some people, knowing that choice, choose to stay asleep, and so was it meant to be this great and powerful thing that's going to really outlive its time just because we keep talking about it? And that's the thing to remember with the mythology is there wasn't a lot of fiction back in the day. They didn't write fiction just for entertainment purposes. It all had a moral to it.
Until the 18th century.
The mythological stories were the spiritual textbooks of that time.
Right.
They didn't have the technology to produce a movie like Groundhog Day, so they told the stories.
Poetry,
that was also their movies too.
Thor and Odin, and then they developed drama. And if you want to know about the history of drama in theater, talk to Bonnie. Don't talk to me.
What about
it all started around an altar.
It did.
Bardic knowledge, or people who held the knowledge through these songs and poems, and it was like you had to know all these different poems and verses.
Well,
they trained for 21 years to be a druid, and they had to memorize all the genealogies and all the mythologies so that they could.
To be a bard.
To be a bard.
Druids were the priests.
Well, they were all part of the druidic caste. There was a sacrificer, there was a bard, there was a healer. There was different spaces or responsibilities within the druidic system. And bard being one of them.
the battle druid.
Battle druid. Don't forget the battle druid.
That was me. I was the battle druid. Okay. Any other comments or questions before we break? Well, one more.
I had
Burning
two
question.
last time, and it's not a question, it's just I was surprised watching it unfold at how long he must have stayed there.
Yeah, I know. Especially how many slaps did he get? He was there at least 2 weeks for
learning
the
the
slaps.
scales to playing jazz.
Yeah, right.
And,
The piano.
A minor time frame when he said 6.5 months.
Oh.
And so many
Yes,
Okay.
he did say that. It's 6 months. So he led the same day over and over for 180 days, roughly. And he learned French. He learned the piano. He learned everybody in town's name and where they were at every moment in time.
One thing that struck me too, though, is like, if we all realized that we were immortal and we all could just keep living the same day however we wanted without obligations and such, how would we lead our lives differently?
I wouldn't be ready.
So, like, for example, it's taken us 7 years of being up on Mount Shasta to disconnect from the blue pill world down in LA, to the point where it's really hard for us to go down there and function in that environment. So on one hand, it makes you realize that, when you start disconnecting from these expectations of the blue pill world, there really is a lot more time to learn about all the things that you want to learn about, or do the things that you want to do. How many times do we walk by a homeless person because we just don't have time to deal with them today, and yet one day you stop and you take the time to do that, and if nothing else, it really changes your own life.
Yeah, when you were saying, how does this apply to us and what can we do? When he realizes he's a god, that's when he starts screwing around and mastering tricks. So, he's just throwing cards into a hat.
Right.
But, it isn't until he, starts to be compelled towards goodness and community that he actually starts learning real skills like music and art and stuff like that too. So he's caught up in like the, I don't know. I feel like that's kind of.
No, well, it's a good mirror for what we do.
Yeah, when you first start to have these sorts of things, it's easy to be seduced by it, and then just liking the trick of it, but then like not actually using it, not applying it. It's not.
I just joined a Facebook page to learn more about Enochian magic and hermetics, and they're huge groups. And you have people who are scholars, and you have people who are total newbies, and they just want to learn. And then you have this middle layer of people that just bash everybody for any question or any answer that they give. But there's so many people that are seeking and want to know stuff, and yet we have to disconnect ourselves and actually start making a change, doing something a little different, and getting different results.
So what occurs to me now is, can we then look at this story about this man's journey as a possible cultural journey that the race, the species, is engaged in?
Well, we are.
Yeah.
There's a way of thinking about that is to think of the human race, all of humanity, as one single organism, and each individual human is a cell in that organism. And the organism will thrive, just like our physical body will thrive, when all the cells are cooperating by doing their job. And what happens if they don't do that? Well, then the worst case is cancer, right? The cells are being very selfish. They're eating all the food they can get, and they're reproducing as fast as they can, and they don't care about any of the other cells, to the point that if they do that too much, they kill the organism. And you look around the world, and you see people consuming all they can at the expense of others, and they're just trying to grow beyond the ability to sustain themselves or others, and it's going to kill humanity if it's allowed to continue in that way. We will either do something like destroy the environment so we can't survive, in which case we all start to die, or in some cases, we have people proactively accelerating that destroy the environment with apparently express intent of wiping out a certain percentage of the population. So that's going on right now. So you can take these lessons that we're applying to our individual lives and, yes, apply them to all of humanity. And humanity has a growth up the tree of life. Human evolution is not done. We are a work in progress.
Thank God.
Yeah. I would hate to think that
I speak for myself, but for us all.
That what we see around us right now, I would hate to think that this is the pinnacle of our growth and that this is the best that God can do. I think God's better than that. So, yeah, we're not done.
The one thing I was going to say about that Facebook site is it's amazing how many people who they've messed around a little bit with some magic, they've got a couple basic things, and now they want to know how to enslave demons to do their will, and, is Satan real, and does he need followers? And it's just like, it's amazing how once people get a small amount of knowledge and a small amount of ability, that they go off the deep end. And we saw that in this movie, where he uses it for getting sex and his own demented purposes. And that's basically what, either lower magic or black magic is about. Black magic and enslaving others. But, when we choose to use power or ability or, knowledge for not only for improving ourselves, but for helping others, then everything shifts. And you'll see that in the dreaming too. If you're involved in something, fear-based in the dreaming, you can feel like you're in sleep paralysis, like something's holding you down, like there's an evil entity in the room. And the second you raise your own vibration, you're in a full-blown flying astral projection dream. So it really has a lot to do with our own attitude on how we switch that switch.
Okay,
I think we're done,
I
huh?
think we're done.
Good job.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thanks for being here.
Now go forth and use these lessons and transform your lives and give me a report on Monday.
And save the world.
Okay.
And thank you to Kent for letting us
Yeah,
do
Thank
this.
you so much, Kent.
See you again soon.
All right.
So we'll